Good day, everybody. Gbenga here. Today, we shall be examining audit planning. Audit planning, part 1. It promises to be exciting and to be a time of deep learning for anybody that wants to know more about audit or use it to organize his business or want to sit for any exam, Ican exam, as it relates to audit. Okay, so this is the dashboard that we are going to be using. Audit planning part 1. This is the dashboard that we are going to be using, and let me quickly set up our class so we can go. Okay, I hope you can see more clearly now. Okay, so let's go there. This is the dashboard we are going to be using. Don't mind the efficacy. Okay, so audit planning part 1 can be broken into 11 subtopics, and we are going to be examining them all one by one using this dashboard. So we are going to know what are the purposes of an audit. Why do we plan for an audit? We move to some critical questions that every audit plan must answer. Critical questions that every audit plan must not fail to answer. Then risk assessment. How do we go about assessing the risk in our client's audit engagement? Professional skepticism. This is an aspect of a professional life that we are going to examine as it relates to audit. The content 5 is all about what are the contents of an audit strategy memorandum, ASM. What are the contents that should be in an ASM, audit strategy memorandum? We're going to know what is audit program or what audit programs are. Also, we are going to examine how we can understand our client's business. Before we go into audit, we need to understand our client's business. So we are going to study that too. Risk assessment procedures. How are we going to go about knowing much about our client's business risk? That is, the company we want to audit. What are the risks they are carrying? Business risk itself, its definition and its breakdowns. We are going to examine also controls in place in the organization we want to audit. What are the controls put in place and how can we go about it? Last but not the least, the types of risks. So let's pick them one after the other. The purpose of an audit plan. So this answers the question, why do we plan for an audit? Just like general rule in life, if anybody fails to plan, they said he or she has or is planning to fail. So one of the reasons we plan is that so that the audit, when we go into it, will not fail. We plan for an audit so that we can know more about it before we go into it. Number 1 purpose or purposes of an audit plan is to help in achieving the goal of expressing an independent opinion. We should not forget it. An audit objective primarily is to express an opinion. So when we plan now, what plan does is to help us to express our opinion, independent opinion, efficiently and effectively. So it helps us to organize ourselves so that we can achieve efficiency and effectiveness in delivering our work or getting the work done, as the slide has shown. So critical foremost purpose of an audit plan is to help us organize ourselves so that we can efficiently and effectively express our independent opinion. Also, an audit plan helps the auditor to devote appropriate attention to important areas of the audit. If we do not plan and we just go into an audit, maybe a client just approach us, please, I would like you and your audit firm to do this for us, and we just rush into it. A lot of things will go wrong. We need to know a lot of things about that particular assignment before we go into it. So therefore, we need to plan for an audit to help us devote appropriate attention to important areas of the audit, like the music people will say, so that we will not major on minors. That is something that is less important. We spend a lot of time on it, and something that are critical, because we did not plan it in advance, we ended up spending less time and devoting less attention to it. So that will not happen. Audit plan is required. Also, it helps auditor to identify and resolve potential problems ahead of time. Audit planning helps us to identify and resolve potential problems ahead. We will go into all this in details. Another thing that audit plan does is helping the auditor organize and manage the audit engagement so that it's performed in effectively and efficient manner. I've marked that one to the first purpose. Also, it assists in the selection of staff. When we plan and we plan good, we will know which level of knowledge is required for this engagement, and we'll be able to devote reasonable time to it. We'll be able to devote reasonable time to it and devote reasonable resources in form of staff to it. So when we plan ahead, we know where some levels of knowledge are required, and we'll be able to deploy it within our organization. Also, planning allows for direction and supervision of staff. Planning allows for direction and supervision of staff, and also the review of their work. So when we plan, we know who should lead, we know who should follow, and we'll be able to put all those things in place, because it has human management equally as a way of affecting the delivery when we go to clients' office or assignments. So it helps us to organize ourselves, to supervise the staff, to direct them on what to do, and also review of the work. That is, as they are working, we are following through on their work so that nothing will go wrong. So these are some of the purposes of audit plan. Okay, yeah, this is equally important. It promised to be an exciting time in class today. Please subscribe to us, GJAMES like our channel, like our page, and enjoy the resources freely available for you. So now that we know the purpose of audit planning, what are the critical questions that audit plan must not fail to answer? What are the critical questions that audit plan must not fail to answer? So we move on to second slide. Typical questions audit plan would answer. One of it is that, what is the scope of work to be done? Every planning of an audit must be able to answer that question. What work is to be done? And what is the scope of the work to be done? What do we want to do for this client? Is it a final audit? Is it an interim audit? Is it a joint audit? What type of job do we want to do? Is it a review? And to what extent are we going in achieving this or in delivering this to them? An audit plan must not fail to answer this. What work do we want to do? Also, who will perform the audit work? That is, who and who among our staff we need to go there or we need to be on board concerning their assignment. Their level of knowledge, their availability, their technicality, all this has a lot to play in putting them on the board for an audit engagement. Also, when will the work be done? We need to know when the assignment will commence and when we are going to end it. Probably if they are reporting deadline, maybe the client is in an industry that requires deadline. Can we meet the deadline? We need to plan towards it. We need to plan towards it. So the time equally will tell us whether the staff that we need, their level of competence will be available, or maybe they will be on other assignments. Also, any recent development in relation to the entity. Maybe they are into an industry that is rapidly changing, like this coronavirus time. That's a lot has affected the organization. We need to know all those recent developments. How are they coping in relation to their business? We need to know so that we'll be able to put it in plan. It's going to affect our risk assessment. Also, the number of staff to be allocated for this kind of work. How many hands do we need to be on deck? So it is during the planning we'll be able to do this. It is during planning we'll be able to achieve this. By the time we know the scope of the work, then we know how to allocate staff and how many number do we need. Where an experienced member of staff may be needed. So when we plan, we will know, okay, there's a technical area, there's a risky area in this business. So let's allot the risky areas to more experienced staff. When the resources are needed, like human resources in form of staff, some people, staff member may not need to join at the onset of an engagement, but must definitely be part of the engagement before it ends, because their knowledge and competence will be required. So we need to know how to shuffle around with our resources. Last but not the least, that we are examining now, how such resources are to be managed, how such resources are to be directed and supervised. So who will be the team lead, who will be the engagement partner, who will be the manager on the engagement, who will be the supervisor, and things like that. All those aspects of work must be managed very well for efficiency, for due collaboration among staff, because it could have a way of affecting our delivery too. So these are the critical questions that an audit engagement must not fail to answer. So we move on to risk assessment. Risk assessment. Okay. To prepare a suitable audit, the auditor needs to have an in-depth knowledge and understanding of the entity, of the business we want to audit. This is not negotiable. This is not negotiable. Before we go to audit a client, we need to know what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what has changed in the industry. Probably it's a client that we've been auditing before. We need to know before we are currently going there now and last time we went, what has changed in our last year file, between the last year file and this year, what has changed, because all those things must be incorporated in our plan. So the knowledge of clients is key. We call it familiarization. You must be familiar with your clients enough to know them, to know their processes, to know their procedures, to know their ethics, to know the risk that surround the business, and to know how they've been managing it in form of controls put in place and the like. The entities to be audited must be known. Their environment in which they operate must be known. The auditor needs all this knowledge in order to assess the risk. I've said that before. Risk assessment is a key feature of the audit planning. Like I said, risk assessment is non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. And the assessment of risk in the audit will affect, that is, after we've been able to assess, know them, and assess everything as much as possible about the client, the amount of work to be performed will be known. We will know to what extent and scope of our work. What scope, to what extent should we audit them? The areas on which the auditor will focus his attention, that is the risky or the riskier area of the assignment. We will know, we'll be able to deploy who will be able to handle and deliver a good job equally around that risky area. The planning process is essential to all audit. I've said that before, whether it's an internal audit or an external audit. It's equally important for any assurance engagement, such as review engagement. So risk assessment is basically key. We must know our clients. Like the banks we do. They'll send you, when you want to open a bank account, they will send you a form. They call it Know Your Customer. KYC form is critical. We need to know our clients before we can audit them and what risk do they carry. So We are moving on to professional skepticism. We move on to professional skepticism. So what do we mean when we say somebody is skeptical? What are we talking about when we say a professional is skeptical? When we say a practitioner is skeptical, what do we mean? By the way, when we are talking about ISA, we mean International Standard of Auditing. It's an international auditing standard. So this is the definition the standard gave us as regards accountants being skeptical. So professional skepticism is an attitude. You should know that one clearly. That is an attitude. And it's not an attitude of disbelief. It's not an attitude of lack of trust. But it's an attitude of questioning mind. Professional skepticism is an attitude of the mind that questions everything. Not that it did not believe everything, but questions everything. And it's good that we should question things. We should question everything around us as professional. Being auditor or not, even to live a successful life, we must question everything around us. Like I think Aristotle said it, that a life unexamined does not worth living. So it is important that a professional must have an inquisitive mind, questioning mind, a mind that questions. Why is this? What is this? Who is this? When was that? Where is that? And things like that. So that is professional skepticism. It is being alert to conditions which may indicate possible misstatement due to error or fraud. We are going to come to error and fraud as we continue. So it's not that a professional or an auditor is saying, I don't trust you. He or she is just questioning in his mind. Okay, so why did you do that? When did you do that? How did you achieve that? All these questions are critical to good job being delivered and a critical assessment of audit evidence. You bring something to an auditor, he or she examines it. Oh, okay, this is dated, but it wasn't signed the same day. Why? It's just to know. Not that he or she disbelieve, but just to know. Just to know. Let's continue. In other words, a practitioner must not simply believe everything management tells them, but must find his or her own independent evidence to support that assertion is correct. That is what management has said is actually correct. That is professional skepticism. So I'm moving on to contents that should be in an audit strategy memorandum. Number 5, content of an ASM. ASM simply means audit strategy memorandum. Audit strategy memorandum is what we can equally call then audit planning memorandum. So when you hear audit strategy memorandum or audit planning memorandum, please know that they are talking about the same thing. Okay, so what should be in an ASM or in an APM? we should please note this, that audit strategy memorandum is a document. Sometimes it could be voluminous or not necessarily. It doesn't need to be voluminous, but it could be voluminous. All it must contain is everything about the planned work. We must plan thoroughly as much as possible, and everything we've planned around the work must be in the audit strategy memorandum. The overall audit strategy must be in the ACM. It must contain the scope, it must contain the timing of the assignment, the, the engagement date, the time we are going to be in the field, when the draft will be ready, when the final will be ready, the pattern of payment, and everything about the timing. As to the extent we need to know if the organization is working in an industry in which they must meet deadline to submit their financial statement. We must know if they were not able to meet that deadline, what are the consequences? What are the penalties? Who are their regulators? All this and many more must be included in an ASM. The direction of the audit, that is the scope and the like, we must know, and guides the development of the more detailed audit plan. So an ACM is a guide, and I need to tell you this, every person that will be on that assignment must be involved in audit strategy memorandum, must be carried along when they are preparing an ASM rather. We cannot say because an engagement partner is leading and the most junior, for example, who had been on that assignment last year, will not be involved in the planning. Let's take for example, that's training, the young trainee, if some of his opinion is not taken into consideration when planning the current audit, something may go wrong because he or she was there last year. He knows how the client respond to them. So you will plan that, okay, this job should be done within 3 weeks. But this guy knows that even the first week, they may not give them or made available necessary things and the like. Or he knows that, okay, a key staff is not around. That audit plan, especially around the area of timing, may fail. So we need to carry everybody that will be involved in the assignment along, even when we are planning. So audit strategy memorandum is a document. Also, another content of an ASM or APM is the establishment of the overall audit strategy. We must look holistically about everything that surrounds the audit engagement, determining the characteristics of the engagement that defines its scope. Part of the scope we need to know is, okay, what will be the framework that we'll be working on? What will be the framework? Like now, framework all over the world has changed. Like in Nigeria, we are using Nigerian standard on auditing before. But now, everybody uses ISA, International Standard on Auditing. So, if an audit, let's say previous audit was conducted using NSA, we must consider how are we going to change the framework of this current audit we want to do to align with the best practices. Also, we must consider industrial reporting. That is, in the industry the client is, what are the requirements of the regulator? Let's take, for example, the banking industry. You cannot audit a bank and not consider the prudential guideline. It's simply impossible. Among any other thing you are going to consider in the audit, you must consider for bank prudential guideline because it is industry specific. So apart from considering what CAMA says and the like, we must consider industry specific matters. And by the way, I want to believe you know that even CAMA 2020 is now around. So you see, all those changes must be considered. When we are auditing now, we must audit based on 2020 Complaint and Allied Matter Act, not on old CAMD or CAMA. So this is what the planning entails. Also, we must consider and put and document it the location of our clients or the components of the clients. When we say component, we are talking about maybe an enlarged organization that has different jurisdiction and territory, branches all over the world and the like. So we must document even with their addresses and the like, so that we will know where to visit when we need to visit those branches. So the location of the component of the entity must be documented too. Also, we must ascertain the report objective of the engagement. Like the deadline that I mentioned, we must meet the deadline. If we are auditing and we could not meet the deadline, one of the objectives has not been achieved. In fact, critical objective has not been achieved. It doesn't really matter to what extent and how we've labored on it. We just have to deliver on time. So deadline must be documented and must be achieved and must be planned towards. And how are we going to communicate to the client? How are we going to communicate to the client? Some clients will say, please, for everything you want to do with us, please send mail to so and so.com. Some can give a landline number. Some can assign a staff that everything, every communication must pass through. So what are other contents that will be in an audit strategy memorandum? The focus of the team. The focus of the team in form of materiality threshold. Like I said during the introductory part, we must not major on minor when we are auditing. That is, we don't spend a lot of time on less riskier area of the business while we leave undone material threshold or material risky area. So when we are talking about materiality threshold, it's a focus for an audit plan or that strategy must take into consideration. And materiality threshold actually is going to be dealt with. Well, let me quickly just address a bit of it. When we're talking about materiality threshold, We are talking about a risk or risk areas in which the auditor has projected the acceptability level and otherwise for it. So those thresholds must be met. If not, the audit become more riskier than expected, and liability often arise if it would not work within threshold. So the threshold must be specifically stated in audit strategy memorandum or audit planning memorandum. The risk areas of the audit of the engagement. What are the audit approaches that we want to take? We are going to examine audit approach. Must be documented which approach, on which area, which approach best suits which risk area. All those things must be put in an audit planning memorandum. So all that we've talked about must be considered by the auditor to decide the nature, the extent, and the timing of resources that will be needed to perform that particular engagement. Okay, so we are moving on. What is audit program? What is audit program? When we are planning, we must not leave audit program out of our view. So, what does it mean? Audit program, simply put, is an instruction. Audit program is an instruction to the audit team. So basically, audit programs are a set of instructions to audit team specifying the audit procedures that should be performed in each area of audit. So an audit program, which we are going to examine in details later, but not here now. When we are talking about audit program, we are talking about set of important instructions on how to go about a specific area of auditing a financial account. Like we are going to have audit program on receivables, or which we call debtors, on prepayment. We're going to have on payable. We're going to have audit program on fixed assets, or that we currently call, its name has changed now. We're going to have on non-current assets or current assets. We are going to have on all those areas that is required. So those set of instructions per segment of financial statements must be documented and put in audit program, in audit strategy memorandum rather. So we move on to understanding the business of our client. Understanding the business of our client.